On the night of July 20th, 2019, Buenos Aires was alive with the roar of the crowd as Hugo Alfredo Dinamita Santillan stepped into the ring for a WBC Latino Silver Lightweight title bout. At just 23 years old, Santillan was a rising star in Argentine boxing, carrying the weight of his family's legacy and his own hard-earned record of 19 wins. Across from him stood Uruguay's Eduardo Javier Abreu, a formidable opponent in a fight that would test every ounce of strength and resilience in both men. From the early rounds, the fight seemed controlled. Santillan's skill and speed were evident, his movements precise, but in the fourth round, a thin line of blood ran from his nose, a subtle warning that something inside him was already damaged. Yet he pressed on, refusing to yield. He fought with courage, with heart, finishing each round and keeping the crowd on the edge of their seats. When the final bell rang, the fight ended in a draw. Santillan raised his arms, trying to celebrate, but before the decision was even fully announced, his body betrayed him. He collapsed in the ring, fainting in front of the stunned audience. The cheers turned to panic as medics rushed to his side, lifting him from the canvas and racing him to Hospital Agudo San Felipe. Inside the hospital, the reality was chilling. Doctors discovered a blood clot in his brain. Emergency surgery was performed, but the fight had left deeper damage than anyone could immediately see. Santillan went into cardiorespiratory failure not once, but twice. Severe swelling in his brain began to overwhelm him, spreading damage to his organs. Despite the doctor's desperate efforts, his young body could not recover. In the early hours of July 25, 2019, Hugo Santan died, just 23 years old, leaving behind a grieving family, fans, and a sport suddenly reminded of its deadly risks. The tragedy struck shockwaves not only in Argentina, but across the boxing world. Only days earlier, Russian fighter Maxim Dadashev, 28, had died from a similar brain injury during a fight in Maryland. Two young lives, full of promise, taken in the ring in the same week. The brutal truth of boxing was laid bare. It doesn't always matter if the punches look fierce, if the fight seems controlled. Sometimes the most lethal blows are the ones you never see. Santillan's story is a haunting reminder of that fragile line between triumph and tragedy. A fighter can appear victorious, can hear the cheers, can raise his arms in celebration, and yet, in the same breath, be consumed by the hidden toll of a single match. Hugo Santan was gone, but the memory of his courage and the sobering lesson of his death will not be forgotten. It was supposed to be a quiet morning at the Paul Ricard circuit. No crowds, no cameras, just the sound of engines echoing across the French hills. For Elio de Angelis, it was another test session, another chance to find the edge between control and chaos. The Italian driver, often called Formula One's last gentleman racer, was known for his calm smile, his piano playing, and his ability to bring grace to a sport built on danger. But on May 14, 1986, that grace met tragedy in one of the most horrifying and heartbreaking moments Formula One had ever seen. De Angelis had joined Brabham that season, stepping into the seat once held by Nelson Piquet. The car he was testing, the radical BT55, was a marvel on paper. Impossibly low, sleek, designed by the brilliant Gordon Murray to cheat the wind. But brilliance can be a gamble. The car's tilted BMW engine caused constant mechanical issues, and that morning it would betray him completely. As Elio pushed the car down the long Maestral Straight, the speed climbed past 300 km/h. Then, without warning, the rear wing snapped clean off. In an instant, the car lost all downforce, the rear lifted, and the Brabham became an airborne missile. Witnesses later described it as a blur of white and blue, cartwheeling violently across the tarmac before slamming into the barriers and bursting into flames. The impact didn't kill him. That was the cruelest part. De Angelis was still alive, trapped inside the wreckage, his body pinned, the fire growing hotter by the second. He struggled to escape, but the cockpit was crushed. Smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating, and there were no marshals nearby, no one to help him. The test session had been minimally staffed, as was common at the time. By the time someone reached the wreck, precious minutes had already slipped away. The fire spread uncontrollably, and the rescuers had no proper extinguishers. no cutting tools, no urgency protocol. De Angelis was forced to wait 30 agonizing minutes for a medical helicopter to arrive. By then, the damage was irreversible. He had suffered only a broken collarbone and minor burns, but the smoke had done what the crash could not. He was airlifted to a hospital in Marseille, where he fought for his life for nearly 29 hours before succumbing to smoke inhalation. He was just 28 years old. The news devastated the paddock. Elio wasn't just another driver. He was deeply loved. He was known for his humility, his kindness, and the rare calm he brought to an intense world. This was a man who would sit down at a grand piano after a race and play Chopin for his teammates. He had once kept fellow drivers entertained during a strike in South Africa, filling a locked hotel with the sound of Mozart while they protested FIA's rules. To his friends, he wasn't just a racer, he was the heart of the grid. His death struck a nerve deeper than most. It wasn't the speed that killed him, or the danger that everyone in the sport accepted. It was the failure of rescue, the silence, the delay. He didn't die from impact. He died waiting for help that came too late. That truth haunted Formula One. The FIA could no longer ignore the gaps in safety during private tests. After Elio's death, emergency standards were redefined. Medical teams had to be on site during all official testing. Marshals better trained. Helicopters ready within minutes. Circuits reevaluated their designs. Paul Ricard itself was permanently shortened. The very section where Elio crashed was removed from future races, as if the circuit itself couldn't bear to repeat the past. His seat at Brabham was later taken by Derek Warwick, one of the few drivers who hadn't immediately called the team looking to replace him after the tragedy. That gesture alone spoke volumes about the type of man De Angelis was, someone even his rivals respected too much to replace overnight. Elio's closest friend, Keke Rosberg, was shattered by the loss. The two had shared laughter, meals, and late-night talks about racing and life. At the end of that season, Rosberg quietly retired. After Elio, he said later, it didn't feel the same anymore. It was Halloween morning, 1999, the final race of the kart season, the Marlboro 500 at California Speedway. For Greg Moore, the 24-year-old Canadian phenom with movie star charisma and terrifying speed, this wasn't just another race. It was supposed to be his last drive with Forsyth Racing before moving to Roger Penske's legendary team. A new chapter, a bigger future, everything ahead of him. But before the engines ever started, something felt wrong. The day before the race, as sunlight cut through the paddock, Moore was riding his motor scooter toward the hospitality area. Out of nowhere, a vehicle blinded by the rising sun clipped him, knocking him violently to the ground. It seemed like a freak accident. Small, unlucky, forgettable, but the damage was real. A deep hand laceration requiring 15 stitches, a fractured index finger, a bruised hip, pain that would have sidelined most drivers. Moore refused that option. Doctors hesitated, teams scrambled, and Forsyth even brought in an emergency backup driver. But after a test session, medical consultations, and a specially modified steering wheel, Moore was cleared to start the race. He would drive with a brace. He would start from the back of the grid. And he would do it hurt. Fans didn't know it then, but they were watching a man race through pain that would have broken others. The race began with chaos. An early crash brought out a long caution, the field crawling slowly around the massive 2-mile oval. When the race finally resumed, Moore started slicing forward, his car twitching as he fought both the track and his own injured hand. Then came lap 10. Moore was running 15th, tucked in the draft, pushing more than 220 a net. Somewhere in the middle of turn 2, his car suddenly wiggled a small slide, barely visible, but enough to start a disaster no one could stop. Some believe he lost the slipstream. Others think the damp patch of grass he'd skimmed earlier unsettled the car. The truth is still debated. What's certain is this: once the car broke loose, nothing could bring it back. Moore spun across the track, leaving long black skid marks, helpless as the car shot toward the infield grass at a speed most cars only touch in straight lines. The grass wasn't flat, an access road cut through it, slightly lower than the ground around it. When Moore's rear wheels hit that drop, the car launched into the air like it had been kicked by a giant. It lifted, it twisted, and then Greg Moore, strapped into a light, open cockpit machine, went airborne at over 220 miles. He barrel-rolled violently, slammed into an unprotected concrete barrier at a perfect 90-degree angle, and the impact registered a staggering 154 G. The car didn't just break apart, it exploded into pieces. Debris flew everywhere. The cockpit area disintegrated. Moore's helmet struck the ground again and again before what was left of the car landed upside down, spinning to a silent, horrifying stop. Track workers ran. Medics climbed in. CPR began instantly. A helicopter was summoned. No one at the speedway needed to be told this was bad. Moore was airlifted to Loma Linda University Medical Center, but the crash forces were beyond survivability. At 1:21 p.m., doctors pronounced Greg Moore dead from catastrophic head and internal injuries. He was just 24 years old. Back at the track, officials lowered every flag to half-staff. Drivers weren't told until the race ended. There was no celebration, no champagne, only silence and disbelief. Fans cried. Crew members stood motionless. The racing world felt the loss immediately, not just of a driver, but of a future superstar whose talent seemed unlimited. Memorials appeared overnight. Thousands of fans lined up to sign condolence books. Schools, dealerships, churches, places Moore once passed through quietly became gathering spots for people struggling to understand how a rising star could vanish in seconds. CART impounded the wreckage and launched a full investigation. Engineers tore apart every piece, analyzed data, reviewed footage. After weeks of study, they arrived at a conclusion no one wanted to hear. There was no single cause, no mechanical failure, no obvious mistake, just a chain of tiny, unpredictable moments that ended with a perfect storm of tragedy. On June 25, 1947, in Cleveland, Ohio, the world of boxing faced a moment of unimaginable tragedy. Jimmy Doyle, a 22-year-old rising welterweight star, stepped into the ring against the legendary Sugar Ray Robinson, chasing a dream that would cost him his life. The fight began with Robinson dominating every round, his speed and precision leaving Doyle struggling to keep up. Only in the sixth round did Doyle land some solid jabs, even cutting Robinson over his eye, giving the crowd a flicker of hope. But it would all be fleeting. In the eighth round, as Doyle lunged for a right hook, Robinson's left hook found its mark. Doyle's body stiffened instantly, his legs collapsing beneath him, and he fell backward as if glued to the canvas. With the last of his instinct, he clawed at the ropes, trying desperately to rise, but his body betrayed him. The bell rang. The referee's count reached 9, and Doyle's handlers realized there would be no miracle this time. Cold water and smelling salts could not revive him. He would never fight again. The arena, once alive with cheers, fell silent as stretcher-bearers carried Doyle's lifeless form to the hospital. Robinson, stunned and haunted, asked quietly, almost to himself, "Is the kid up yet? The punch only traveled 6 inches, I think." But it was too late. Doyle never regained consciousness and passed away roughly 17 hours later, leaving a stunned public to grapple with the harsh reality of boxing's dangers. Jimmy Doyle had fought not just for glory, but for his family. A year earlier, he had suffered a brutal knockout in California and was warned that he had sustained severe brain damage. Doctors said he should never fight again. Friends and family noticed he had changed, less lively, quieter, more withdrawn. Yet he returned to the ring, driven by a desire to prove himself, to buy a home for his mother, to reclaim the manhood and purpose he felt slipping away. After Doyle's death, Robinson, racked with guilt despite having done nothing illegal, donated the earnings from his next 4 fights to Doyle's mother so she could buy the house her son had dreamed of providing. It was a bittersweet gesture, a glimmer of humanity amid the horror of a young life cut tragically short. Boxing had always been dangerous, but Doyle's death marked a chilling reminder. In the ring, every fight carries a shadow. Every punch could be the last. And though decades have passed and safety measures have improved, the story of Jimmy Doyle still echoes, haunting the sport and all who love it, a tragic testament to the price of courage and the fragility of life inside the ropes. It was Sunday blue skies over Monza, the roar of engines echoing through the grandstands, and the world's best drivers battling for glory. But on September 10, 1961, the Italian Grand Prix turned into one of the darkest days in Formula One history. At the heart of it was Wolfgang von Trips, a German aristocrat, a count by birth, and a rising star behind the wheel of Ferrari's Scarlet Machine. Fans called him Taffy, a name that carried warmth and admiration. He was leading the World Championship, poised to make history. But fate had something else in store. On the second lap, Von Trips and Jim Clark raced side by side down Monza's long straight, two men chasing immortality at over 200 km/h. Then, in a split second, everything went wrong. The two cars made contact with Clark's front wheel, clipped Von Trips's rear. The Ferrari jolted violently, lifted into the air like a missile, and then horror. It vaulted over the barrier and into the crowd. The scream of the engine was replaced by chaos metal twisting, people running, and silence falling over the grandstands that just moments before had been cheering. Von Trips never made it to the hospital. He was gone instantly, thrown from the wreck. 15 spectators were also killed, men, women, even children, standing too close to the dream that had suddenly turned into a nightmare. The scene was indescribable. In a sport where danger was always part of the thrill, this was something else, a tragedy that shattered the illusion of safety for both drivers and fans alike. That day changed Formula One forever. It forced the world to confront a question no one wanted to ask. What happens when speed, ambition, and human error collide head-on? The aftermath was grim. Ferrari withdrew from the rest of the season, despite already securing the Constructors' Championship. Von Trips, who had been leading the title race, was posthumously declared runner-up, losing by just 1 point to his teammate Phil Hill. He had been more than just a driver. He was a pioneer who brought nobility to the cockpit. Born into a Rhineland noble family, Von Trips grew up in a castle in Kerpen, near Cologne. He struggled with diabetes, often carrying high-sugar snacks in his car to fight off low blood sugar during races. But nothing stopped him. From his first podiums in the late 1950s to his hard-fought victories at Zandvoort and Silverstone in 1961, he had climbed his way to the top of the motorsport world. Behind the polished smile and refined manner, there was a man obsessed with racing, willing to risk everything for the pursuit of speed. And yet, it was that same passion that claimed him. The sight of his car soaring off the track, the screams from the stands, and the eerie silence that followed still haunt Formula One's collective memory. The FIA soon banned races on circuits with steeply banked corners. Safety barriers, spectator zones, and car designs were all re-examined. But for many, the scars of that day never truly healed. In a cruel twist of fate, Von Trips had built a karting track in his hometown of Kerpen just before his death, the same track where, decades later, Michael Schumacher would begin his journey to becoming one of the greatest Formula One drivers of all time. It's as if Von Trips's spirit lingered there, guiding another German prodigy to fulfill the destiny he never could. It was supposed to be just another race weekend, with engines screaming through the hills of Imola. Fans had poured in under the bright Italian sun for one reason: to witness Ayrton Senna da Silva, the Brazilian genius, the three-time world champion, the man who didn't just drive Formula One cars, he tamed them. To millions, Senna wasn't a racer. He was a force of nature, a symbol of courage so fierce it bordered on myth. But on that Sunday, May 1st, 1994, the myth met mortality, and the sport's heartbeat simply stopped. Even before the main event began, something about that weekend felt wrong, almost cursed. On Friday, Senna's close friend Rubens Barrichello slammed into the barriers at 225 km/h, his car cartwheeling like a rag doll. Senna sprinted to the medical center, pacing, shaking, only calming when Barrichello finally opened his eyes. It was one of the few moments of relief that weekend would allow, because the next day, tragedy struck again. During qualifying on Saturday, Austrian rookie Roland Ratzenberger hit the wall at over 300 km/h after his front wing snapped clean off. The impact was so violent it killed him instantly. When Sid Watkins, Formula One's chief doctor, told Senna the news, the champion didn't respond. Not with words, at least. His face fell, and tears filled his eyes. Watkins, seeing his friend unravel, begged him to quit. "Let's go fishing," he said. "Forget this." But Senna only whispered back, "I can't stop." Racing wasn't a job to him. It was the pulse in his veins. That night, he called his girlfriend, Adriana Galisteo, and finally let the fears spill out. He talked about the crashes, the dread, the sense that something terrible was coming. Yet, when the sun rose on Sunday morning, he put on the calm face of a champion. Over breakfast, he even reconciled with his old rival, Alain Prost, discussing plans to revive the Drivers' Association and make racing safer. It was as if he knew he wouldn't get another chance. Then the race began, and the chaos followed instantly. JJ Leto stalled on the grid. Pedro Lamy smashed into him, sending metal fragments flying into the stands. Spectators were hurt. Panic rippled. The safety car came out, but it was too slow, forcing Senna to crawl behind it as his tires cooled, losing precious heat, losing grip, losing stability. When the green flag finally returned, there was a moment where everything felt normal again. Williams roared. The crowd rose. Senna flew. But on lap 7, everything changed. As he thundered through Tamburello, the fastest corner at Imola, the steering column of his car snapped without warning. At 309 km/h, Williams shot straight off the track. The grass didn't slow it. The concrete wall didn't move. The impact was catastrophic. 211 km/h to 0 in a heartbeat. The front wheel broke free. The suspension exploded. A metal suspension arm tore into Senna's helmet. For a few agonizing seconds, millions watching around the world waited for him to move. A hand, a wave, anything. But there was only stillness. Sid Watkins reached him first. When I lifted his eyelids, he later said, I knew. Senna had suffered a fatal brain injury, and when they lifted him from the wreckage, Watkins felt his friend sigh, as if his soul had left his body. At 6:37 p.m. in Bologna's Maggiore Hospital, Ayrton Senna da Silva was gone. When the news reached Brazil, time seemed to stop. Millions lined the streets. His coffin, wrapped in the national flag, moved through São Paulo like a slow heartbeat. People cried openly. His death forced Formula One to change. Stronger car structures, safer tracks, faster medical response. For 20 years afterward, no driver would lose their life in an F1 race. On the night of July 19, 2019, the lights of the MGM National Harbor in Oxon Hill, Maryland, shone down on one of boxing's most anticipated bouts. Maxim Dadashev, undefeated and hungry for glory, stepped into the ring against Subriel Matias in a junior welterweight title eliminator. For fans and fighters alike, it was supposed to be another night of sport, skill, and triumph. But for Dadashev, it would become a night that changed everything. The fight was brutal from the opening bell. Dadashev, trained by former world champion Buddy McGirt, had fought his way up through 13 professional bouts without defeat. He had knocked out opponents, claimed the WBC NABF light welterweight title, and defended it with precision. This was his moment to get one step closer to a world title. Yet, as the rounds wore on, the punishment began to tell. Every punch he absorbed seemed to chip away at the walls of his stamina, his body slowly weakening under Matias's relentless assault. By the 11th round, it became clear even to those at ringside. Dadashev was fading. He protested when McGirt stepped in, sensing the danger his fighter might not see. "If I don't, the referee's gonna do it. Come on, Max, please," McGirt urged, trying to reach him over the roar of the crowd. With heavy reluctance, he threw in the towel, stopping the fight. Dadashev's eyes told a story of defiance. He wanted to continue, but the decision had been made. As he stumbled from the ring, leaning on his trainer for support, an ominous silence took hold. Dadashev never made it to the dressing room. He collapsed in the corridor, vomiting, his body failing him in a way no one could have predicted. He was rushed to the University of Maryland Prince George's Hospital Center, where doctors discovered a subdural hematoma, a lethal accumulation of blood in the brain. Surgeons fought to save him, performing emergency surgery and placing him in a medically induced coma, hoping to halt the swelling and give him a chance. But hope was fleeting. By July 23rd, Maxim Dadashev, just 28 years old, was gone. A life full of promise, years of dedication, and a family that adored him. His wife, Elizaveta, and their young son were left to grieve in silence. In the wake of his death, the world of boxing was shaken. Questions about safety, regulation, and the brutal reality of the sport resurfaced. "It just takes one punch," McGirt said, his voice heavy with disbelief and sorrow, a grim reminder of how fragile life can be in a sport defined by strength. The tragedy ignited investigations from both the Boxing Federation of Russia and the Maryland State Athletic Commission. Promoter Bob Arum covered funeral expenses, honoring a promise to support fighters beyond the ring, while a GoFundMe page was created to help Dadashev's family. His body was returned to St. Petersburg, Russia, for burial, a hero's send-off in the place where his story began. In that ring that night, thousands witnessed the courage of a young fighter willing to risk everything, unaware that his last stand would leave an indelible mark on boxing's history. The loss of Maxim Dadashev is a stark, heart-wrenching reminder of the sport's peril and the human cost behind every punch. It was supposed to be just another race weekend, a blur of speed, glory, and noise echoing through the hills of Imola. The 1994 San Marino Grand Prix had drawn thousands under the Italian sun, all waiting to see one man, Ayrton Senna da Silva, the Brazilian genius, the three-time world champion, and the very soul of Formula One. For millions, Senna wasn't just a driver. He was a symbol of courage and perfection, a man who danced on the edge of danger. But that Sunday, May 1st, became the darkest day in Formula One history, the day the sport's heart stopped beating. The weekend had already felt cursed. On Friday, Senna's close friend Rubens Barrichello crashed at 225 km/h, his car flipping violently. Senna ran to the medical center and waited outside until Barrichello regained consciousness, a rare moment of relief in a weekend filled with dread. But the next day brought tragedy. During Saturday qualifying, Roland Ratzenberger, a rookie Austrian driver, struck a wall at over 300 km/h after his front wing failed. The impact killed him instantly. When Sid Watkins, F1's top doctor, told Senna the news, the champion's eyes filled with tears. Watkins urged him to quit, to go fishing instead. But Senna quietly replied, "I can't stop. Racing was his life." That night, he called his girlfriend, Adrienne Galistu, and broke down. He spoke of the fear, the crashes, the feeling that something terrible was coming. Still, on Sunday morning, he showed up determined. Over breakfast, he even made peace with his old rival Alain Prost, talking about reviving the Drivers' Association to improve safety, as if sensing what was ahead. At the start of the race, chaos struck. JJ Leto stalled on the grid, and Pedro Lamy crashed into him, sending debris into the stands. The safety car came out, but it was too slow. Senna's tires began cooling, losing grip. After 5 laps, the race restarted. On lap 7, the blue and white Williams flew through Tamburello, Imola's fastest corner. Then, disaster struck. At 309 km/h, Senna's steering column suddenly snapped. His car veered off track, skidding across the grass before slamming into a concrete wall at 211 km/h. The impact was brutal. The front wheel tore free, the suspension exploded, and a suspension arm pierced his helmet above the right eye. For a few seconds, the world held its breath. Millions watching live hoped he'd climb out, but he didn't move. Sid Watkins arrived within moments. When I lifted his eyelids, he later said, it was clear he had a massive brain injury. As we lifted him from the car, he sighed, and I felt his spirit depart. Senna was airlifted to Bologna's Maggiore Hospital, but at 6:37 p.m. he was pronounced dead. He was just 34. Inside his wrecked car, officials found a folded Austrian flag Senna had planned to raise at the finish line to honor Ratzenberger, who had died the day before. It was a heartbreaking final gesture from a man who carried others' pain as deeply as his own. In Brazil, millions poured into the streets. His coffin, draped in the national flag, moved through São Paulo as the city fell silent. Even those who never followed racing felt the loss because Senna was more than a driver. He embodied passion, faith, and humanity in a sport built on danger. His death changed Formula One forever. The FIA immediately launched sweeping safety reforms, stronger cockpits, improved crash barriers, faster medical response, and redesigned circuits. For 2 decades after Senna's death, no driver was killed during a Formula One race. Imola was never the same. The Tamburello corner was reshaped into a chicane, with a scar left where the greatest of them all took his final breath. On February 18, 2001, at Daytona International Speedway, millions expected a celebration. Dale Earnhardt Sr., the most feared and respected man in NASCAR, was defending the perfect finish for the 2 cars ahead of him, Michael Waltrip and his son Dale Earnhardt Jr. Nobody knew they were watching his final lap. Earnhardt wasn't just another driver. He was the driver. 7 championships, 76 wins, and a presence that intimidated the entire field. That day, he wasn't chasing glory for himself. He was blocking, defending, and doing everything he could to deliver a dream ending for his team. The race had already been brutal. A massive crash on lap 173 destroyed nearly half the field. Earnhardt escaped, but he radioed a chilling warning. "Richard, if they don't do something to these cars, it's gonna end up killing somebody." It sounded almost prophetic. As the white flag waved, Waltrip and Earnhardt Jr. led the race. Behind them, Earnhardt fought off Sterling Marlin and Ken Schroeder in a 180mm knife fight. Then, turn 4, the final corner. Marlin tapped Earnhardt's left rear. A tiny touch at full speed. The number 3 snapped sideways, slid up the track, and crossed directly into Schroeder's path. Schroeder slammed into him. A second later, Earnhardt's black Chevrolet hit the concrete wall head-on at nearly 160 miles. No fire, no explosion, just a violent stop that made the crowd go silent. Schroeder climbed out, looked into Earnhardt's car, and immediately signaled for help. He later admitted he knew instantly Dale was gone. Waltrip won the Daytona 500. Earnhardt Jr. finished second, but victory lane felt hollow. Minutes later, NASCAR President Mike Helton delivered the sentence no one thought they'd ever hear. "We've lost Dale Earnhardt. A basilar skull fracture, instant, fatal." The shock shook NASCAR to its core. Black Sunday, the intimidator, the man who survived everything, was suddenly gone. But his death forced the sport to change. The hands device became mandatory. Safer barriers were installed everywhere. Car design, seats, belts, every safety standard was rebuilt from the ground up. Since then, no driver in NASCAR's top 3 series has died during a race. Dale Earnhardt saved lives by losing his own. That final quiet crash in turn 4 still echoes today, because everyone remembers where they were when the black number 3 hit the wall, and when the Intimidator never climbed out again. On March 24, 1962, Madison Square Garden was alive with energy as thousands of fans watched a welterweight title fight that would end in tragedy. Benny "Kid" Paret, a Cuban champion known for his toughness, stepped into the ring against Emil Griffith, a skilled and relentless opponent. For 11 rounds, the battle raged back and forth. Paret landed moments of brilliance, even staggering Griffith in the 6th round and cutting him over the eye, giving the crowd a glimmer of hope. But the end was approaching, and no one could see it coming. In the 12th round, Paret found himself trapped against the ropes. Griffith unleashed a furious, unrelenting barrage of punches, each one landing with brutal precision. At first, Paret tried to defend, but the blows kept coming. 29 consecutive punches battered his head and body. He was dazed, unable to protect himself. The referee hesitated, perhaps afraid of angering the crowd or doubting whether Paret could actually be hurt, but finally stepped in as the champion crumpled to the canvas, nearly falling through the ropes. The audience watched in stunned silence as Paret was stretchered from the ring, barely moving. He was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, underwent surgery for massive brain hemorrhages, but never regained consciousness. 10 days later, the young champion was gone, leaving the boxing world to confront a horrifying truth. In the ring, even the strongest and bravest could fall. Paret's death was not just a single moment of misfortune. In the 12 months leading up to that fateful fight, he had endured grueling bouts against Griffith and Gene Fulmer, fights that had already taken a serious toll on his body and left him vulnerable. The rapid schedule, the repeated punishment, and the decision by boxing authorities to clear him for another fight combined into a perfect storm of tragedy. Even the fight's spark, the infamous confrontation at the weigh-in where Paret allegedly taunted Griffith with a deadly insult, added fuel to the fire. Cultural tensions, personal pride, and the raw ferocity of the sport collided in a way that would forever change the lives of those involved. Griffith carried guilt for decades, haunted by the man he had knocked down and by the life he had ended. Yet, in a quiet, emotional moment years later, he was embraced by Paret's son and forgiven, a small human redemption in a story defined by loss. The broadcast of that fight, seen by millions, shocked the nation and sparked intense scrutiny of boxing. Questions arose about the sport's safety, reflecting later on Owen's honor and determination. The Owens family held no malice, offering support to Pinter, recognizing the harsh and unforgiving nature of the sport. Yet the world of boxing would never be the same. Rules were changed, rounds shortened, and fighters reminded of the invisible line between glory and mortal danger. The 1970 Formula One season was supposed to be Jochen Rindt's crowning moment, a year that would finally cement his place among the legends. The Austrian driver had been unstoppable, winning race after race with fearless precision. His Lotus 72, sleek and revolutionary, seemed untouchable on the track. Fans adored him for his bold driving style, his calm confidence, and his ability to find speed where no one else could. Heading into the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Rindt was on the verge of becoming world champion. No one could have imagined that it would be his final race weekend. During practice on September 5, 1970, tragedy struck. Rindt's Lotus hurtled down Monza's long straight at over 200 miles per hour, when suddenly, without warning, the car veered left. The front brake shaft had failed. The Lotus slammed into a poorly installed guardrail, tearing apart on impact. The nose of the car was crushed, the cockpit twisted, and Rindt was thrown forward violently despite being strapped in. His seatbelt, fitted in a way that allowed him to move more freely, a common practice among drivers, then slid up his body during the crash. The harness caught his neck instead of his chest, inflicting fatal injuries. The rescue teams rushed to the scene, but there was nothing they could do. Jochen Rindt was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. He was just 28 years old. The news spread like wildfire. Shock rippled through the paddock, the grandstands, and across Europe. Everyone knew Rindt had been destined for greatness, and now that promise was gone in an instant. His wife, Nina, stood silently in the pit lane, watching the car being brought back, her face pale with disbelief. But the cruelest twist came weeks later. Despite his death, Rindt's championship lead was so commanding that no one could surpass his points total. When the season ended, he was officially declared the 1970 Formula One world champion, the only driver in history to win the title posthumously. His name was engraved on the trophy, his legacy immortalized, but the victory felt hollow, shadowed by grief. Rindt's death exposed the dangers that drivers had long accepted as part of the job: the broken guardrails, the lack of runoff areas, the fragile cars that all came under fire. His passing forced Formula One to face its negligence. In the aftermath, major safety reforms followed: better crash barriers, stricter harness designs, and improved car construction standards. Jochen Rindt's story is one of brilliance cut short by a man who chased perfection and paid the ultimate price. Every corner of Monza still whispers his name, a chilling reminder that even champions aren't immune to the dangers that lurk behind the pursuit of speed. On June 25, 1947, in Cleveland, Ohio, the world of boxing faced a moment of unimaginable tragedy. Jimmy Doyle, a 22-year-old rising welterweight star, stepped into the ring against the legendary Sugar Ray Robinson, chasing a dream that would cost him his life. The fight began with Robinson dominating every round, his speed and precision leaving Doyle struggling to keep up. Only in the sixth round did Doyle land some solid jabs, even cutting Robinson over his eye, giving the crowd a flicker of hope. But it would all be fleeting. In the eighth round, as Doyle lunged for a right hook, Robinson's left hook found its mark. Doyle's body stiffened instantly, his legs collapsing beneath him, and he fell backward as if glued to the canvas. With the last of his instinct, he clawed at the ropes, trying desperately to rise, but his body betrayed him. The bell rang. The referee's count reached 9, and Doyle's handlers realized there would be no miracle this time. Cold water and smelling salts could not revive him. He would never fight again. The arena, once alive with cheers, fell silent as stretcher-bearers carried Doyle's lifeless form to the hospital. Robinson, stunned and haunted, asked quietly, almost to himself, "Is the kid up yet?" The punch only traveled 6 inches, I think, but it was too late. Doyle never regained consciousness and passed away roughly 17 hours later, leaving a stunned public to grapple with the harsh reality of boxing's dangers. Jimmy Doyle had fought not just for glory, but for his family. A year earlier, he had suffered a brutal knockout in California and was warned that he had sustained severe brain damage. Doctors said he should never fight again. Friends and family noticed he had changed, less lively, quieter, more withdrawn. Yet, he returned to the ring, driven by a desire to prove himself, to buy a home for his mother, to reclaim the manhood and purpose he felt slipping away. After Doyle's death, Robinson, racked with guilt despite having done nothing illegal, donated the earnings from his next 4 fights to Doyle's mother so she could buy the house her son had dreamed of providing. It was a bittersweet gesture, a glimmer of humanity amid the horror of a young life cut tragically short. Boxing had always been dangerous, but Doyle's death marked a chilling reminder. In the ring, every fight carries a shadow. Every punch could be the last. And though decades have passed and safety measures have improved, the story of Jimmy Doyle still echoes, haunting the sport and all who love it, a tragic testament to the price of courage and the fragility of life inside the ropes. Tom Pryce never knew that the race he started at Kyalami in 1977 would be the last moment of his life, because what killed Tom Pryce wasn't a mechanical failure, a dangerous corner, or even another car. It was something far more horrifying, a moment of human instinct colliding with 270 km/h of unstoppable force. His father was a police officer, his mother a nurse. As a boy, he drove a baker's van at 10, dreaming of speed, dreaming of touching the same glory as his hero Jim Clark. He cried when Clark died. He cried again when Jochen Rindt was killed, but the danger never scared him. It called to him. He fought through the ranks the hard way. Formula Ford, Formula 3, anything that had wheels and a chance. By 1974, he made it to Formula 1, first with Token, then Shadow. By 1975, he had his first podium, his first pole, and a stunning win at the Race of Champions, becoming the one and only Welsh driver to win a Formula 1 race. People who knew racing could see it clearly. He wasn't just good, he was special. And in 1977, at the South African Grand Prix, he was flying again. In wet practice, he set the fastest time of anyone, quicker even than Niki Lauda. It looked like the race might be his comeback moment, but race day would turn that promise into horror. Tom made a bad start, dropping to last, but he began carving his way back up the field with quiet determination. By lap 22, he had climbed 9 places. He was focused, smooth, gaining momentum. Ahead of him, his teammate Renzo Zorzi pulled off the track. Fuel leaked onto the engine and caught fire. A small fire, but enough to panic 2 young marshals on the opposite side of the track. One of them was 19-year-old Frederik Frikkie Janssen van Vuuren, only a teenager, only seconds from death. Without radio communication, without authorization, the marshals ran across the track, blind to the fact that Formula 1 cars were approaching at full throttle, cresting a rise that completely hid them until the last second. The first marshal barely made it across. The second never had a chance. Hans-Joachim Stuck came over the hill first and saw them. He swerved right, missing the first marshal by inches, but right behind him, just a heartbeat behind, came Tom Pryce. And from where Tom was sitting, tucked into Stuck's slipstream, he could not see the teenager until the very last fraction of a second. There was no space, no time, no warning. At 270 km/h, Tom's shadow hit the young marshal with unimaginable force. Janssen van Vuuren was thrown into the air, killed instantly, his body almost unrecognizable. The fire extinguisher he carried, 18 kilograms of steel, exploded into Tom's helmet with such violent impact that it tore the extinguisher high over the grandstand and into the parking lot. Tom never even had time to know it happened. He died instantly, but the car, still at full throttle, kept going. With its driver already dead, the Shadow continued down the straight like a ghost, bouncing off barriers, smashing through a service entrance, and finally colliding head-on with Jacques Lafitte's Ligier at Crowthorne Corner. Marshals ran toward the wreck, confused, unsure which driver had survived, if any had. It took time before they realized one of the marshals was missing, and only then did they understand the full scale of what had happened. On the podium, Niki Lauda celebrated a victory, his first since his near-fatal crash the year before, until a quiet official stepped in and told him the truth. "There is no joy after that," Lauda said, the celebration dying in his throat. In Wales, in Kent, in every corner of the racing world, people who knew Tom Pryce broke. His wife Nella, whom he had married only 2 years earlier, his parents, who had watched their boy rise so far from so little, his team, still shaking from the shock. Tom was buried in the same church where he had stood smiling in his wedding suit not long before. On March 24, 1962, Madison Square Garden was alive with energy as thousands of fans watched a welterweight title fight that would end in tragedy. Benny "Kid" Paret, a Cuban champion known for his toughness, stepped into the ring against Emil Griffith, a skilled and relentless opponent. For 11 rounds, the battle raged back and forth. Paret landed moments of brilliance, even staggering Griffith in the 6th round and cutting him over the eye, giving the crowd a glimmer of hope. But the end was approaching, and no one could see it coming. In the 12th round, Paret found himself trapped against the ropes. Griffith unleashed a furious, unrelenting barrage of punches, each one landing with brutal precision. At first, Paret tried to defend, but the blows kept coming. 29 consecutive punches battered his head and body. He was dazed, unable to protect himself. The referee hesitated, perhaps afraid of angering the crowd or doubting whether Paret could actually be hurt, but finally stepped in as the champion crumpled to the canvas, nearly falling through the ropes. The audience watched in stunned silence as Paret was stretchered from the ring, barely moving. He was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, underwent surgery for massive brain hemorrhages, but never regained consciousness. 10 days later, the young champion was gone, leaving the boxing world to confront a horrifying truth. In the ring, even the strongest and bravest could fall. Paret's death was not just a single moment of misfortune. In the 12 months leading up to that fateful fight, he had endured grueling bouts against Griffith and Gene Fulmer, fights that had already taken a serious toll on his body and left him vulnerable. The rapid schedule, the repeated punishment, and the decision by boxing authorities to clear him for another fight combined into a perfect storm of tragedy. Even the fight's spark, the infamous confrontation at the weigh-in where Paret allegedly taunted Griffith with a deadly insult, added fuel to the fire. Cultural tensions, personal pride, and the raw ferocity of the sport collided in a way that would forever change the lives of those involved. Griffith carried guilt for decades, haunted by the man he had knocked down and by the life he had ended. Yet, in a quiet, emotional moment years later, he was embraced by Paret's son and forgiven, a small human redemption in a story defined by loss. The broadcast of that fight, seen by millions, shocked the nation and sparked intense scrutiny of boxing. Questions arose about the sport's safety. Boxing has long been celebrated as the ultimate test of courage, skill, and endurance. But behind the glory of the ring lies a darker, more brutal reality. Every punch thrown carries risk, and for some fighters, that risk proves fatal. Over the years, there have been chilling moments when the sport's intensity turned deadly, leaving fans, trainers, and families devastated. From tragic knockouts to catastrophic brain injuries, these are some of the most terrifying boxer deaths ever recorded that remind us that in boxing, the line between triumph and tragedy is razor thin. The 1967 Monaco Grand Prix was meant to be a celebration of speed and elegance, the glamour of the French Riviera meeting the thrill of Formula One. The streets of Monte Carlo shimmered under the Mediterranean sun as engines roared between yachts and cheering spectators. But that afternoon, beauty turned to horror in an instant. Behind the wheel of his scarlet Ferrari was Lorenzo Bandini, adored in Italy, respected across the racing world, and known for his humility despite the fame that came with driving for Enzo Ferrari. He had come so close to greatness before, and many believed this would be his day. For 82 laps, Bandini chased Denny Hume's Brabham, pushing harder than ever. His car skimmed the barriers with each turn, the crowd holding its breath. Then, as he entered the harbor chicane, one of Monaco's most treacherous corners, fate struck. His Ferrari's rear left wheel clipped the guardrail, sending the car into a pole before flipping into a wall of straw bales. The impact was violent, and then came the fire. In moments, Monte Carlo vanished beneath a plume of thick, black smoke. The red Ferrari became a fireball. Marshals rushed in with extinguishers, but the flames were relentlessly feeding on leaking fuel and ignited straw. Bandini was trapped beneath the wreckage, motionless, as the heat grew unbearable. Spectators screamed from balconies and yachts, helpless as the inferno consumed everything. Over a minute passed before rescuers could reach him. The straw bales, meant for safety, had become a death trap. When Bandini was finally pulled out, it was too late. His body was covered in third-degree burns, his chest crushed, his face unrecognizable. He was rushed to Princess Grace Hospital, where doctors fought desperately for 3 days. On May 10, 1967, Lorenzo Bandini was gone. He was just 31. The image of his Ferrari burning beneath the Monaco sun remains one of the most haunting in F1 history. Flames reflecting off the blue harbor, panic echoing through the narrow streets. The horror wasn't just in the crash, but in the helplessness of watching a man consumed by the dream he lived for. Bandini's rise made it even more tragic. Born in Libya and raised in Florence, he had started as a mechanic's apprentice before working his way to Formula One. He'd once fixed cars in a Milan garage before earning his first podium in Monaco, the very same place that would take his life. By 1967, he was Ferrari's top driver, a national hero, and a world champion in the making. But fate, cruel as ever, intervened. His death shook the sport. The horrifying images from Monaco led to swift change. Straw bales were banned, marshals were better trained, and new safety barriers were introduced. Bandini's sacrifice forced Formula One to confront its dangers and evolve. More than 100,000 people attended his funeral in Reggiolo, many in tears as his coffin passed draped in Ferrari red. Enzo Ferrari was devastated that the man who brought so much pride to his team had perished in its service. What makes Bandini's death unforgettable isn't just the flames or the crash, but the cruel irony that he had once helped film a movie, Grand Prix, suggesting that very harbor chicane for a crash scene, unaware it would become his own. The world remembers Ayrton Senna's tragic death at Imola, but what many forget is that the nightmare began the day before, with a man who never got the chance to become a legend. Roland Ratzenberger wasn't a superstar, wasn't a champion, wasn't a household name. He was something purer, a dreamer who fought for more than a decade through obscurity, debt, and heartbreak just for one shot, at racing in Formula One. And on April 30th, 1994, during qualifying for the San Marino Grand Prix, that dream ended in a single, devastating instant. Roland had come a long way from the quiet streets of Salzburg. He wasn't born into wealth or privilege. He built his life the hard way, hanging around Walter Lechner's workshop as a teenager, fixing cars, sweeping floors, learning everything he could. By 18, he joined Lechner's racing school. By his early 20s, he was clawing his way through Formula Ford, then touring cars, then Formula 3000, then Japanese prototypes, then Le Mans. Nothing came easily. Every contract was fragile. Every season was a gamble. Every race was a fight to be noticed. But Roland never stopped. He kept chasing speed across continents, truly believing, that he would one day reach Formula One. And in 1994, unbelievably, impossibly, he finally did. A small team, Simtech, gave him a chance. Not a competitive car, not a winning team, but a seat, a place on the grid. Proof that after more than a decade, he had made it. His debut didn't go perfectly. He failed to qualify in Brazil. But in the next race in Japan, he fought from the very back of the grid all the way to 11th. For a rookie in a car barely capable of finishing races, it was a small miracle. In Imola, he wanted more. His sponsor was attending for the first time. Halfway through his 5-race deal, he needed to impress. He needed to prove he belonged. And he knew he had to push. But Imola in 1994 felt cursed. On Friday, Roland watched Rubens Barrichello's horrific crash and waited anxiously for news. The next day, he strapped himself into his Simtech, determined to qualify and determined to push right on the limit. Early in the session, he ran wide at Ac Minerali. The off-track moment didn't look serious, so Roland checked the car as best he could and kept going. But something unseen had already been broken. His front wing, weakened by the earlier mistake, was hanging on by just a breath. And then came the moment that made time freeze. At over 300 km/h, he threw the car into the Villeneuve corner. The wing failed. It snapped clean off, jammed beneath the chassis, and in an instant, Roland became a passenger in a machine he could no longer control. The car went straight. No turning, no chance. A violet flash of Simtech purple shot off the track and slammed into a concrete wall at a speed no human body could survive. The impact destroyed everything. Within seconds, the world knew. Within minutes, the paddock fell silent. Roland had suffered fatal skull injuries, the kind that end life instantly. Formula One had not seen a driver die during a Grand Prix weekend in 12 years. Some younger mechanics had never experienced it at all. And when Bernie Ecclestone delivered the news to the Simtech garage, everyone broke. David Brabham, Roland's teammate, was so shaken he barely remembered the rest of the day. Ayrton Senna rushed to the medical center. When Sid Watkins, the legendary F1 doctor, told him Roland had died, Senna cried. Watkins begged him to skip the race, to quit, to walk away. But Senna shook his head and whispered, "I cannot stop." Hours later, Senna withdrew from qualifying. Roland's grid spot was left empty. The next day, Senna himself would die. Roland's death, though overshadowed by the loss of a global icon, still left a deep wound. At Roland's funeral, only 5 drivers came. Most were already back in the whirlwind of racing, of obligations, of moving forward. Max Mosley, the FIA president, chose to attend Roland's funeral instead of Senna's. His explanation was simple and heartbreaking. Everyone went to Senna's. I thought it was important that somebody went to Roland's.